And I'm really happy to be with all of you thanks to the Worcester Public Library. So if you bear with me, I'm just going to share my screen because I have slides I want to show you. So I'm hoping you can see that. So welcome to the case for coffee. I'm really glad you can join me. There are a lot of reasons to like coffee. A lot of us like the taste. We like how it makes us feel. And also for many people, it's just a really important part of our routine, like in the morning. It's just a part of our day. And there seem to be some health benefits associated with coffee. So if you like coffee, and I'm guessing a lot of you do because you're here, you're probably going to like a lot of this news. But it's not as if everyone should just be drinking unlimited amounts of coffee. And for some people, it really isn't for them. There are some concerns with coffee in some cases, and I want to address those as well. So I really do, as Priya said, I really do welcome any comments or questions you might have. So I can take them at the end, or you can put them in the chat box, whatever you feel inclined to do. And I'm going to show you some really beautiful paintings that have to do with coffee. So I hope you enjoy those. And in case you haven't been to any of my classes before, because you're registered, you will receive an email with an image of the slides in case any of it is important to you and you would like to save it. So this is what I want to talk about today. I want to spend a little time talking about what caffeine is and how it affects us and what coffee actually is. I want to give some history of coffee and how it came to be such a popular beverage. I want to talk about the health effects, both the good and the reasons that you might want to avoid or at least limit coffee or caffeine. And then also what we add to coffee, because that can make the difference between it being a really healthful beverage and not really a healthful beverage. So I want to start with this painting. I love this. This is one of my favorite coffee paintings. This is by Camille Pissarro, who was a French-Danish impressionist. And I love this painting of a young peasant girl drinking her coffee. I'm assuming it's the morning by the light that's coming in, the soft light through the window. And she could be just like any one of us, just enjoying her big cup of coffee in the morning. So about caffeine, I want to start with caffeine because I know that the appeal of coffee for many people has to do with the caffeine. This is the molecular formula, which nobody needs to know, but I just wanted to show you that it's made up of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, like a lot of the biochemical compounds that we consume. And caffeine is a member of a family called methylxanthines, and these are central nervous system stimulants. And there's other different ones in tea and cocoa, as well as caffeine also being in those plants. So caffeine occurs in the seeds and leaves of more than 60 plants that people know of. And it can also be produced in the lab, and synthetic caffeine is added to some medicines, foods, and beverages. These are the plant sources of caffeine that you might be familiar with. Remember, there's more than 60 of them, but these are the ones that you're likely to encounter. So of course, there's coffee beans that we roast and make into coffee. There's Camellia sinensis, which is the real tea plant, and the leaves are steeped to make tea. There's cacao pods, and the beans from those are made into cocoa powder and chocolate. So thank heaven for the cacao pods. There's cola nuts, which are the fruit of the cola tree, which is native to the African rainforest. And this is what's used to flavor soft drink, colas, like Coke and Pepsi. There's yerba mate, which is an evergreen plant of the holly genus grown throughout South America. And the dried leaves and twigs are steeped to make a tea. And finally, there's guarana, which is a member of the maple family, native to the Amazon basin. And you may have heard of this if you've flipped over something like an energy drink and looked at the ingredients. Guarana is what's commonly used in energy drinks and energy shots, which I don't recommend for any reason. Basically the top 3 on this list are the ones that I recommend, not so much the bottom 3. So the effects of caffeine, which probably all of us are familiar with, are many. It gives us feelings of energy and alertness. It can even elevate our mood. And all this is part of the reason that many of us like it so much. It also can enhance athletic performance. And a lot of athletes do drink caffeine containing beverages before an event. I've read that the really serious athletes will sometimes only have caffeine before an event so that they really feel the effects. It causes a temporary increase in blood pressure. And for that reason, it can be problematic for anyone with uncontrolled hypertension. And too much caffeine, you may have felt the effects at one time or another. It can lead to a rapid heart rate, irritability, anxiety, feeling jittery, having trouble sleeping, and a headache. And I do want to emphasize that caffeine doesn't have the same beneficial effects as coffee. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some great health effects associated with coffee, but it's not primarily from the caffeine. So let's take a look at the caffeine content of a few items of chocolate and then some beverages. Um, so first I'm comparing milk chocolate and dark chocolate at the top, and you can see that dark chocolate has about double the caffeine of milk chocolate. And this is per 1 ounce. So that's not much caffeine. 6 ounces or 6 milligrams or even 12 milligrams is not a lot of caffeine. You'd have to be pretty sensitive to it to feel the effect of that. And just so you know, 1 ounce of chocolate is equivalent to 6.25 Hershey's Kisses. So we all kind of know what that looks like. It's a reasonable serving of chocolate. And that's kind of good to know because often if you have a very big candy bar that's multiple servings, they'll say a serving size is about 1 ounce. Anyway, moving down the list, a cola beverage, 12 ounces, would have usually anywhere from 35 to 45 milligrams of caffeine. A cup of black tea, so it's going to depend on how long it's steeped, but 8 ounces of tea might have around 47 milligrams of caffeine. 8 ounces of coffee might have about 100, although it can be higher. I've seen that it can be as high as 200. So, you know, it's kind of hard to know exactly how much. Decaf coffee, on the other hand, that same 8 ounces will be anywhere from 2 to maybe 15 milligrams, usually at the lower end of that range. So you might have heard, like I have, oh, decaf coffee still has a lot of caffeine. That simply isn't true. It's decaffeinated and it doesn't. And espresso is very high. A 1 ounce shot has 65 milligrams of caffeine, and many people drinking espresso don't stop at a 1 ounce shot. But what I really want to know is the amounts can really vary. When I was trying to put this little table together and I was looking them up, they vary tremendously. And I think that I don't know, maybe it's difficult to measure caffeine, but I think it actually does vary. I saw one study looking at Starbucks coffee where they checked the same coffee day after day and they were getting vastly different amounts of caffeine. So don't focus too much on the amounts and just know that coffee has the most, and then tea, and then cola beverages if you're, you know, looking at beverages. Here's another painting I love, Cézanne's La Femme de la Cafetière, the lady with the coffee pot. I love her coffee maker over on the right. That is called a drippolator. And some of you, maybe like me, have your grandparents' drippolator that looks just like that. So there's a middle section where the ground coffee goes, and then the boiling water gets poured over the top and drips down into the bottom basin. So it's a nice way to make coffee. And this lady, nobody knows exactly who she was, but art historians believe she was probably one of Cézanne's servants. He didn't like to use professional models like a lot of other artists did in his day. He often used family members and servants in his household. So anyway, what is coffee? That is a silly question because we all know what coffee is, most likely. But let me just tell you a couple things about it. It's from the coffea plant, which is a genus of flowering plants in the family Rubiaceae. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it's cultivated in over 70 countries, with the #1 source being Brazil. It is a major export commodity. In fact, in some countries, it's the major commodity crop, so it's very important financially. And it's got a little fruit called a coffee cherry. It looks more like a berry, but it's called the coffee cherry, and I'm going to show you that on the next slide. And it has seeds. There's usually 2 seeds in every coffee cherry, and those are the coffee beans. We roast them, and that releases the oil, caffeine, and that gives it its characteristic aroma and flavor. I don't know if any of you have ever had the chance to sniff unroasted coffee, the green coffee beans, but I have because they gave me some once at Armino Coffee in Northborough. Absolutely no aroma. As hard as I sniffed it, I couldn't smell anything. So they have to be roasted until they get that great aroma and flavor. And then the roasted coffee beans are ground, and of course we make coffee out of them. It is one of the most widely consumed beverages in the world. The order seems to go water, then tea, then coffee. Here's a picture of what the coffee cherries look like on a plant. This is from a Robusta coffee plant. And again, there's usually 2 coffee beans in each one of those. There are many variables that'll determine what the coffee tastes like and how it affects us. And here's some of them. The species has an effect. There are over 120 species, but the most common ones are Coffea arabica and Coffea canephora, which is what we call Robusta. And I guess the arabica is supposed to be somewhat sweeter tasting, and Robusta, I think, has more caffeine. Some of you might know more about these differences than I do, and if you have anything you want to share about that, feel free to let us know. You can put it in the chat box. The degree of roasting will have an effect. Dark roast becomes drier and is more single note in flavor. So I guess you could say that the lighter roast coffees are more complex. And certainly, whether it's regular or decaf, is going to have an effect on how we feel from it. And there are many people that can differentiate in the taste between regular and decaf. Not everyone cares, but some people notice a big difference in the taste. And then, of course, how the coffee is prepared, whether it's boiled, steeped, or brewed under pressure, will have an effect on the taste. And I think also another thing that can determine our enjoyment of coffee is the implements that we use to prepare the coffee and what we drink it out of. So this beautiful Van Gogh from 1888 just shows some beautiful cups, and the coffee maker itself is gorgeous. And that can all be part of our enjoyment of coffee. Many people today are very proud of their coffee making devices, and I bet many of us have a favorite mug or a coffee cup. So that's all part of the ritual of coffee. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of coffee, and I know I've mentioned this book in other classes. It's a great one. Tom Standage's A History of the World in 6 Glasses. This was published in 2006. But it really holds up today. He talks about how these 6 beverages did nothing short of affect the history of humanity. So beer, wine, spirits, coffee, tea, and cola have all had such an effect on us, and that very much includes coffee. So let me explain some coffee history, and most of what I'm going to say I did get from that book. So for thousands of years, the most common beverages were beer and wine. Coffee just wasn't well, coffee wasn't around. I was going to say water wasn't safe to drink in many places for hundreds or thousands of years, especially when cities started to be developed. The water was often contaminated, and people learned that they could drink beer and wine. And then coffee was somehow stumbled upon. It's no one's exactly sure where, but it's thought maybe Ethiopia, maybe Yemen, somewhere around there, possibly by shepherds. And visiting Europeans brought it back to Europe in the early 1600s. So in the book, Standage is telling about the history of coffee primarily from a European standpoint. Um, so at the same time in Europe in the 1600s, it was an age of rational inquiry, which is otherwise known as the Enlightenment. And there were many new ideas in philosophy, politics, religion, commerce, as well as other fields. And coffee promoted clarity of thought. It became the drink of merchants, clerks, scientists, intellectuals, all kinds of thinkers. So Standage makes the case that this is not a coincidence, that we actually might owe the age of reason, in part anyway, to coffee. The way he puts it is that Western Europe began to emerge from an alcoholic haze that had lasted for centuries. And that might very well be true because people were drinking mostly beer and wine prior to coffee. Fascinating to think about. Anyway, the 1600s, it was the age of coffee houses. This is in contrast to taverns, which had been around a lot longer. Taverns, according to Standage, were grimy and kind of dark places. You can kind of envision them, whereas coffee houses were lighter and brighter, and they actually had nice furniture and bookcases and pictures on the wall. So coffee houses were a respectable alternative. And this is some of the functions that coffee houses started to serve in the 1600s. They were meeting rooms. If you wanted to have a meeting, you could meet at a coffee house. They were centers of commerce and trade. People had political debates there. There were discussions of theater and there were poetry readings. There were lectures and scientific and even medical demonstrations. Can you imagine that going on in your Starbucks today? They served as mailing addresses. Back before people had mailboxes and before there were post offices, you could arrange to get mail at a coffee house. You could go there to get the latest news and gossip and rumors. Publications were circulated. They served as the first stock markets and auction houses and insurance markets. To give you an example of that, there was a guy named Edward Lloyd who in the 1680s had a coffee house, and ship captains and ship owners used to congregate there. And eventually the people that would underwrite their insurance began meeting there with them. And that kind of evolved into something called the Society of Lloyds. And that evolved into Lloyds of London, which even today is, I gather, the world's biggest insurance market. So it all started in some guy named Lloyd's coffee house in London. So Standage, the author of the book, says that coffee houses or coffee shops, we call them today, pale by comparison to what they had in the 1600s. And when I look at this list, I have to think he's probably right. This is a rare drawing. There aren't too many drawings of coffee houses, but this is one from, let me just move my Zoom view. This is from around 1690. And you can see that it's bright and well lit and, you know, looks clean and people are congregating there. I think the only woman in the drawing is the woman who's behind the counter serving the coffee. Okay. Anyway, today coffee is still a great way to connect. It hasn't gone away and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. We have coffee shops still. We have neighborhood coffee groups. Coffee is very much a part of the workplace culture in many places. It's served at conferences and business meetings. In fact, I just want to say, can you imagine a conference or a business meeting where they didn't serve coffee? Might not go as well. It's a great way to linger over dinner. Like maybe you've been out to dinner with friends and you're having such a good time that you don't want to end it. Coffee, or for that matter, tea, is a really good way to prolong a nice dinner. And what does it mean when someone says, do you want to get a cup of coffee? Very often it means they want to be your friend. So let's look at what's going on in a cup of coffee nutritionally. It's a very complex mixture. There's over 1,000 compounds in coffee. So here's some of them that I want to talk about. We're all familiar with the caffeine, and I've already discussed that. There's also trace amounts of carbs, fats, and amino acids, the building blocks of protein, but not much. There's a little bit of some vitamins and minerals. We're certainly not relying on coffee to get our vitamins and minerals and protein, but there's little bits in there. And there's riboflavin, which is a B vitamin, and there's some magnesium, manganese, and potassium. So that's all good. But what there's a nice good amount of is chlorogenic acids, and these are powerful antioxidants, and these are thought to likely be responsible for some of the health benefits of coffee. And in smaller amounts, there's anthocyanins, which are the phytochemicals that we find commonly in dark fruits and vegetables like plums and peppers and berries and dark leafy greens. So we know those are really good for us. And lignids are a form of fiber. So this is all good. And then there's also diterpenes, which are the oils in coffee. So I want to talk about some of the health benefits that coffee seems to have. And what I'm going to talk about comes mostly from an article that was published in the BMJ, which is the Journal of the British Medical Association. And this was published in November of 17. It's an umbrella review of meta-analyses. So it's looking at many, many studies. And it was designed to assess all existing evidence of the effects of coffee consumption on health. They looked at a lot of studies, and the lead author, whose name is Robin Poole, summed it up by saying, the great news was that aside from pregnancy, drinking coffee was more frequently associated with benefit than harm. Here are some of the associations that were seen. Regarding cardiovascular disease, coffee drinking is associated with a reduced risk of developing cardiovascular disease and death from cardiovascular disease compared with non-coffee drinkers. And regarding type 2 diabetes, which is by far the most prevalent variety of diabetes, both regular and decaf are associated with a decreased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And with some cancers, especially caffeinated coffee is associated with a lower risk. And those included prostate, endometrial, liver cancers, and melanoma. And there were several others. And this is attributed, again, to the antioxidants, although the exact cause of the association is unknown. And I do want to emphasize that these are associations. These were not anything like double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials, which would be kind of, the gold standard. But they're intriguing associations, and there were so many of them that it looks good for the health benefits of coffee. With liver disease, the evidence for coffee and liver conditions is stronger than findings in any other health category studied. So coffee drinking is consistently associated with benefits, including lower risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is becoming very common, a lower risk of liver fibrosis, liver cirrhosis, and liver cancer. Again, these are associations, but very intriguing, very, very hopeful. Some other conditions, coffee consumption seems to be associated with lower risk of gallstones, gout, Alzheimer's disease, depression, and Parkinson's disease. With Parkinson's in particular, it was caffeinated coffee, where they saw that association. And also cognitive function. This is not from the BMJ article. This is from other research that I've got referenced at the end, but this is probably going to come as no surprise to a lot of people that coffee seems to benefit us cognitively, but it's been shown with caffeinated coffee, improvements are shown in alertness, mood, attention, processing speed, and reaction time. But even with decaf coffee, it's been shown to improve alertness and mood. And since it's likely not the little tiny bit of caffeine in there, it's been attributed to, it's possibly, again, those chlorogenic acids, those antioxidant compounds. So it's a reasonable question to ask, how much coffee is okay? So I'm going to give you the guideline from the 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines for Americans. These are updated every 5 years, and the most recent edition did just come out, but it is addressed specifically coffee intake in the 2015-2020 version. So what they say is moderate coffee consumption if desired. Certainly nobody needs to have coffee, but if desired, it's fine. And they say up to 3 to 5 8 fluid ounce cups a day. I like to interpret that as like maybe 2 big mugs, and beyond that, maybe we want to switch to decaf. So they say providing up to 400 milligrams of caffeine per day. So, I think we have to pay attention to how we feel. For some people, that would be too much caffeine, and they're going to just feel better if they have a bit less. So what are some of the reasons to limit or avoid caffeine or coffee? There are several reasons. Probably primarily, very important to mention, is pregnancy. So coffee drinking during pregnancy is associated with an increased risk of miscarriage and low birth weight. Caffeine does cross the placenta, and the fetus has very little levels of the enzymes to break it down. So the World Health Organization advises that pregnant women limit themselves to 2 to 3 cups of coffee, having somewhere around 200 to 300 milligrams of caffeine per day. I actually, myself, don't really agree with this. I think since we know that it's associated with an increased risk of miscarriage and low birth weight, probably most pregnant women, knowing that, would want to maybe go lower than 200 to 300 milligrams of caffeine. It, certainly can be done, but that's what they recommend, so I'm putting it up here. And then some other reasons that you might want to limit coffee or at least caffeine. There's lots of good reasons. So if you suffer from insomnia, you are certainly going to want to limit caffeine, especially later on in the day. You might want to shift it all to early in the day if you're having it. Anyone with uncontrolled hypertension, as I mentioned, should avoid large doses of caffeine because it does have that effect of temporarily increasing the blood pressure. So a person having a lot of coffee, that could be a significant increase in blood pressure. Anyone with a cardiac arrhythmia, this can be really serious, and they should ask their doctor, especially if you have a cardiologist, should consult with them and say, is it okay for me to have any caffeine at all? Women at high risk of fractures, caffeine may have an effect on calcium absorption and bone mineral density, but I don't see why a woman with osteoporosis couldn't have decaf coffee. Esophageal reflux disease, some people with GERD are sensitive to coffee, both decaf and regular. So if you have reflux disease, you just want to pay attention and see if coffee bothers you. It doesn't bother everyone with GERD, but it might, it bothers some people, and it's worth paying attention to. And anyone who has anxiety that they noticed is fueled by caffeine is going to want to go easy on it. And then finally, children. The American Academy of Pediatrics says that caffeine should be discouraged in children. And one thing that's unfortunate is that children, especially teenagers, are some of the primary consumers of the energy drinks like Monster and Red Bull, which is really not a good idea. There have been a lot of visits to ERs because of these beverages, and they don't have to say how much caffeine is in them. So I guess I just want to say that again, nobody needs to drink coffee. You know, it is really good news that it's got these great plant compounds, these great antioxidants in it, but we can also get those from eating a vegetable, you know, a plant-rich diet. We can get it from lots of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and so on. Okay. There is another effect that I want to mention, and this is for anyone who might be struggling with a high cholesterol or a high triglyceride level. This is certainly not going to apply to everyone, but unfiltered coffee has consistently been shown to be associated with increases in LDL cholesterol and triglycerides. LDL cholesterol being the bad one that increases risk of cardiovascular disease. So this association is not seen in people who drink coffee brewed using a filter. So unfiltered coffee is coffee made using a French press, which is shown on the slide on the right, and also Scandinavian boiled coffee and Turkish boiled coffee. So in these situations, the coffee is boiled using no filter. So the grounds are right in the water. So it's a simple fix. If you have high serum lipids and you are having trouble getting them down and you're drinking unfiltered coffee, maybe you want to try switching over to using a filter. If you have decided it's a good reason for you to cut back on caffeine for any reason, for any of the reasons I talked about or any other reason, here's some tips for you. You, first of all, probably want to go slowly unless you have a medical condition where you've been advised to hurry up and get off caffeine. But otherwise, you probably want to go slowly to avoid the withdrawal symptoms. And they can be very unpleasant. You might feel very tired, have a headache, have muscle pain, even feel depressed. So you can go really slow. You can cut back by maybe 1 cup of coffee per day every week. So it's just a gradual reduction. And then you might not even notice it. You can certainly substitute decaf coffee. You might want to consider buying half calf, like this Folgers half calf shown here. Um, I know there are other brands of half calf. I don't see them very often besides Folgers, so I'm just not very familiar with them. But you could also make your own half calf. You could certainly mix ground coffee, regular and decaf in any proportion you want and make your own. And you could consider other options, like if you're just after a hot beverage in the afternoon, you might want to have decaf tea or herbal tea, or for that matter, even just like hot water with lemon juice in it is really nice. So consider what it is that you're after. And now I want to share with you some more paintings of different ways in which people enjoy coffee. So here's another Van Gogh, orphan man with top hat drinking coffee from 1882. I'm not quite sure of the use of the word orphan there. I don't think it's meant to be orphan in the way that we think of orphan. I think it just means that he's alone. And I'm interpreting this painting as one who might be saying, I just need my cup of coffee in the morning. Although who knows what this man was really thinking. And, polar opposite of that, this is by Jose Solana, who was a Spanish expressionist painter. This, to me, appears to be a very formal setting where these people are gathering. I guess the Pombo was a coffee house, and these people are gathering and they're dressed impeccably, and the coffee looks like it's part of, maybe the end of a very formal gathering or meal or something, served in those kind of glass containers on the table. And here's another Van Gogh, woman grinding coffee from 1881. Again, I don't know who she is either, but Van Gogh painted a lot of peasants hard at work. And I'm wondering if maybe she was a servant in a household and she's grinding the coffee for other people. She certainly doesn't appear to be someone who had a nice, easy life. Um, but again, I'm not sure. And Matisse, Lorette with a coffee cup from 1917. The coffee cup is way over on the right. So naturally, I had to look up who Lorette was to Matisse when I saw this. And she was an Italian model that he painted over 25 times. So that's what I know about her. And there's her cup of coffee. And then finally, I love this by one Edouard Villard. He's a French painter, Woman with a Cup of Coffee from 1895. Um, I'm not sure what he was thinking or trying to say, the artist, but it's maybe, I'm thinking maybe this is how some people might feel before they have that first cup of coffee. Just projecting here. But I love, if you look carefully, I love how one of her eyes is a star. I just think it's very interesting. I don't know if you can see that. And, maybe both of her eyes will be stars once she has her first cup of coffee, that is. Just a interesting painting. Okay, so let's talk about what we add to our coffee. We should pay careful attention to that. So here are some healthful choices. Of course, skim or low-fat milk. In fact, for many people, the cup of coffee is the primary source of getting milk, which is a great source of calcium and vitamin D. And it might even be a great way of getting our protein in the morning if we're having more of coffee than anything else. And then the plant milks tend to be really nutritious, especially the unsweetened ones like soy milk, almond milk, oat milk, and there's many others. You might want to add a dash or even more of things like cocoa powder, cinnamon, nutmegs, clove, and cardamom, or pure vanilla extract. And certainly if you're out having a treat, you could get a low-fat latte or cappuccino, or get one made with a plant milk. Most places will do this for you. Not so good, on the other hand, are all of these. So a lot of people use the coffee creamers thinking that they're healthful because they're an alternative to maybe the half and half or the cream that they were using. But most of these are made of things like corn syrup solids and coconut oil. So they're really not good nutritionally. Nor is all the flavored syrup that's added in many coffee shops, or the heaping spoonfuls of sugar that many people add. So I'm not here to say don't add any sugar to your coffee. Certainly you want to enjoy your coffee, but you want to take a look. If you're adding a lot of these things, maybe you want to think about some substitutions or cutting back a little on the sugar. These are never a good idea. These are actually fairly small containers of the Dunkin' version and the Starbucks version. So they used to call it a Colada. I think it's just called an iced coffee drink now, and a Frappuccino. So if you look at the size of these are only 13.7 ounces. They're pretty small, and you can get much larger versions in the coffee shop. But look down at the amount of sugar in one of these. That's 45 and 47 grams. That's over 11 teaspoons of sugar. And these are sold all over the place. These are sold in CVS and in supermarkets. Just not a good choice. A couple more paintings. Here's a Renoir. This coffee pot, I couldn't find the exact date, but I think it was painted around 1900. I love how he really captured the metal. I'm not sure whether that's brass or copper because I don't know my metals well enough, but it's just really shiny and beautiful. Just back to how we really enjoy our coffee implements. And I think this is very similar, this Toulouse-Lautrec coffee pot, also just so shiny that, you could see yourself in it. And it almost does look like there's an image of somebody in it. Okay, so here's a bit of a menu, just in case you, like me, didn't understand, maybe some of you know this if you're real coffee connoisseurs, but maybe you don't know the difference between all these coffee beverages. So I just want to show you. So espresso is a very concentrated form of coffee made by forcing pressurized hot water through very finely ground coffee beans. And I've already talked about how that has a lot of caffeine. A latte is made with espresso and a large amount of steamed milk. A cappuccino is an Italian coffee drink traditionally prepared with equal parts of double espresso, so I think that just means more espresso, steamed milk, and it has a steamed milk foam on the top, and the image here is of a cappuccino. Cafe au lait is equal parts steamed milk and strong hot coffee, so an important part of a nice French breakfast. Cold brew has become very popular in the past few years. And in cold brew, just like the name implies, there's no heat used in the brewing. So the ground coffee is soaked in cold water for 12 to 24 hours and then strained. It is said to be smoother tasting with less acidity than hot brewed coffee. Maybe some of you can comment on that if you've had it. It's usually served iced, but it can also be heated. And then finally, nitro. Nitro is cold brew infused with nitrogen bubbles, which is said to add a creaminess and a slight fizz. If you have a can of nitro, you're supposed to shake the can and then pour it. I'm actually very anxious to try it. So now I just want to show you a couple places where you might find coffee besides a cup of coffee, just for fun. So we're all familiar with, like coffee ice cream. Here's Dannon coffee yogurt. There are many coffee yogurts now, but I do believe Dannon was the first. I remember Dannon coffee yogurt back from when I was in college, and I would have one many days a week from the campus center for my lunch. Sometimes I would have two. And also they weren't this size. Dannon now has these 5.3 ounce yogurts. Back then, I do believe all yogurts were 8 ounces. And I don't know if anyone else remembers when Dannon went down to 6 ounces, they tried to sneak it by us. They didn't change the price. They kept charging the same price, but they went from 8 to 6 ounces. And now, of course, there's many varieties of yogurt, many sizes. But coffee, back then was very unique. Here's Kahlua, which is one of the more popular coffee liqueurs made only in Veracruz, Mexico, and it contains rum, sugar, and 100% Arabica coffee. And you can see per serving a very small amount of caffeine. And this I like. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm about to. This is called coffee flour. And I haven't seen it in a store yet. I understand that some Trader Joe's have it, but not the one in Shrewsbury because I've looked. But coffee flour is something relatively new. I found this on Amazon. It's made from the coffee cherry, that fruit I showed you before. They dehydrate it and they grind it into a powder. Apparently there's not much to it. It's mostly just the skin. There's not a lot of pulp in it, but they grind it into a powder. The reason I'm saying this is such a good news is it's from a sustainability standpoint. Before, apparently the coffee cherry was mostly just discarded, but now they're actually doing something with it. It's not a true flour from what I've read and listened to on podcasts. It's more like a flavoring agent. Think of like it's supposedly like a fruity tasting cocoa powder, but that sounds like a good thing. It's supposedly good in smoothies and chia pudding, which is a nice treat. And it can be used in baked goods. I've heard you can replace like maybe 2 tablespoons in every cup of flour with this coffee flour. It's a good source of potassium, fiber, iron, and it also does have some good antioxidants, which isn't surprising when you look at the color of those coffee cherries. They're deeply colored, so they're bound to have some good plant compounds. It also does have some caffeine. I'm not sure exactly how much, but if you decide to try this, you just want to be careful and maybe not have it at 11 at night. Another use of the coffee cherry, I did a double take when I found this on Amazon. I was like, is this a coffee? Is it a tea? What is it? I'm going to call it an herbal tea. So an herbal tea is anything, any part of a plant that we steep that's not the real tea plant. So all kinds of twigs and leaves and stems out in the plant world get steeped into a tea. So this is just another one of them, and it happens to be the coffee cherry being steeped into a tea. I'd love to try it. I don't know if I will because it's a little expensive, but I'd love to try it. And it did have really good reviews on Amazon. It did. And also it does contain caffeine, in case you're wondering. And of course, there's coffee candy. I thought coffee nips were a thing of the past. I thought it was a really retro thing. And then I found it on Amazon, and I also saw that it's being sold at Staples. So there they are. And here's a smoothie recipe. This is my own recipe. And actually, if you have leftover coffee sitting around, it can be really nice in a smoothie. So you mix it with these ingredients, and the coffee with the cocoa powder makes a nice mocha flavor. And bananas, when they're frozen, go really well in a smoothie. They make a nice ice cream-like consistency. So if you try this, I hope you enjoy it. And finally, just one last painting. This is from Pierre Bonnard, called Coffee from 1915. I love how this woman is enjoying her cup of coffee with her coffee colored dog right next to her. I just think it's very sweet. And I hope however you choose to have your coffee that you enjoy it and that you drink it in a healthful way. I do have some of the references here for you in case anybody's interested in following up on any of these topics. And with that, I want to thank you very, very much. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that maybe I can see if anybody sees some of you. And if anybody does have any questions or comments, I'm very happy to try to address them.
So yes, Mani asks, Mani says it's a spectacular presentation, and also asks, do the health benefits of coffee vary with the degree that coffee is roasted?
Thank you so much, Manny. I'm really happy to see you here. And I am not aware of any health benefits varying with how much it's roasted. I'm sorry, I'm just not aware of any of that, but I can certainly look further into that BMJ article.
This next question is actually from me. Does instant coffee have the same health benefits as other forms of coffee?
Ooh, Priya, that's a really good question. I don't know. That's a really good point. I wish I had addressed instant coffee here, but I don't want to say that I know when I don't. But I certainly am going to look it up so that the next time I give this presentation, I will know more about instant coffee. I'd be surprised if it didn't have some benefits. It's going to have those chlorogenic acids, but I don't know if some of it is lost.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Manny asks again, what is your opinion regarding adding stevia to coffee?
Okay, my opinion is, this is a loaded question. It depends who you ask. My opinion is that the non-nutritive sweeteners, stevia, monk fruit, and erythritol in moderation are fine. Some of the problems that seem to be associated with some of the other non-nutritive sweeteners are concerning, and I don't recommend Sweet and Low or some of the others. But those, again, stevia, monk fruit sweetener, and erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol, in moderation seem to be fine. And I stress that moderation with the erythritol because the sugar alcohols can, in large amounts, cause some gastrointestinal distress in some people. But if you enjoy putting some stevia or some monk fruit sweetener in your coffee, I think that's fine. Sugar is known to be inflammatory. So sugar is problematic for a lot of people. So if it helps you to use less sugar, I think that's a good thing.
Jackie says, thank you. And Alex has a question. Is the decaffeination process unhealthful in any way?
Not that I'm aware of. You will hear some people concerned about it because chemical solvents are used to extract the caffeine. That isn't in and of itself a bad thing. And I have not come across anything to say that it is harmful. So I would opt not to worry about that one unless I see otherwise.
Thank you. A couple of observations. Sandra says, most interesting presentation, very well done. I enjoyed the program with a cup of decaf.
Thank you, Sandra. I like that.
Elaine says, this was a wonderful presentation sent from a tea drinker who drinks coffee on occasion.
Thanks, Elaine.
And Alex says, great presentation once again. Thank you so much, Judy and WPL.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's comments and questions. Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions before we wrap it up?
I will say that my next two classes, next Thursday, the 18th, is the third in a 3-part diabetes series, and I'm going to be talking about sugary topics. And anyone who's interested in coming to that, you do not have to have been to the previous 2 diabetes classes. Each one can stand independently. And on Saturday, March 13th, the timing of our calories, I'm going to explore the importance of not just what we eat, but when we eat, time of day, and so on. So that is on the online calendar on the library website. It's not yet listed under adult classes. So if you're looking for that, you might have to scroll around a little bit. But anyway, I thank everybody very much for coming.
Thank you, Judy. I actually added at the end of the chat the links that I said I would. It's a link to our nutrition and healthy cooking blog on our website. If you could also take a moment to do our program survey, that would be very appreciated. I also listed a link to all our classes and programs so you can sign up for more programmings that we offer. Judy, thank you so much. This was a very informative class and a program. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Bye.